The American Egyptian Women of Influence podcast aims to be the American Egyptian culture podcast of choice. We believe that our knowledge and our participants' stories will greatly enhance understanding of both cultures. I'm Karen Leggett Aburaya. Sahar Aziz is the founding director of the Rutgers University Center for Security, Race, and Rights in New Jersey. The center provides a focus for the issues Sahar has addressed throughout her legal career, starting in the Office for Civil Rights at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, continuing as a professor at Texas A&M, where she taught Middle East Studies, and now at Rutgers, where she is also the Chancellor's Social Justice Scholar and a Middle East and Legal Studies Scholar. We're talking in June 2020, when America is convulsed with both the coronavirus pandemic as well as its racist history, which keeps manifesting itself in the killing of African Americans. Sahar, you're also a member of the Rutgers Newark Chancellor's Commission on Diversity and Transformation, and we're certainly going to need a transformation in the United States. From your vantage point, how do you see the way forward for that transformation now?
Well, the first thing we need to do is we need to focus on action. We've seen a lot of platitudes from various institutions, CEOs, and people who in the past have been silent in terms of their rhetoric, but certainly quiet or inactive in terms of transforming society. So it's time for us to start looking at how we can make systemic changes to our society in various areas, such as access to quality education, access to quality health care, protection from abuse by the police, elimination of racial and religious profiling, desegregating housing, increasing social welfare programs for the poor, such that everyone has an equal opportunity for social mobility, and eliminating this delusion, this myth of individual responsibility, because all of us are dependent on our families, our teachers, our schools, our societies, our neighborhoods for our success. No person is an island, and this myth of individualism perpetuates the stereotypes that if we have systematic inequality along wealth and race, then it's an individual's problem. It's an individual's fault rather than a societal problem, and the society has to fix these problems. So I'm hoping that with the awareness of systemic racism as the underlying problem of police brutality in particular, but other types of racial inequality, that then people will be called to action. And again, action is the operative term, to start making some very difficult choices and some very difficult decisions that will redistribute wealth and opportunity across society, so that the equal opportunity slogan is actually meaningful rather than simply a political slogan that's hollow.
You've been talking about this sometimes online a lot now in connection with the Center for Security, Race, and Rights, which you founded 3 years ago. What will be the center's role in the kind of transformation that you just talked about, but also what do you hope the center will achieve in particular for Muslims in America?
Well, the center is a culmination of my own work with many other people, allies within the Muslim, Arab, South Asian communities and outside, but the culmination of work on combating anti-Muslim racism, Orientalism, stereotypes of Palestinians, that they're terrorists and that they're violent, and trying to institutionalize those efforts. So the center is hopefully another institution that will play the long game pursuing social justice, because there are multiple points in transformation. One is the crisis that produces the momentum that we're seeing now, with the protests and with the media covering these issues and with people talking about systemic racism and structural bias and wealth inequality that overlaps with race. This is an important and difficult point to get to, But unfortunately, what we've seen in the past is that it lasts for a certain amount of time, and then people forget, people lose interest, they get distracted. The people whose lives are not directly impacted, right? The ones whose lives are directly impacted day in and day out never forget, and they never get distracted because it's their daily existence. But those tend to be the people who are not in power and the people who don't have wealth by design. And so the challenge for those of us who truly are committed to social justice is, how do we play that long game? And we need institutions to do that. We need institutions that don't belong to a particular person or don't belong to a group of people, but are things that live on and that are the legacy of ideas, and that can then adapt to each of these points of crisis and make sure that action is taken and that the infrastructure is in place in order to take those actions.
So you just see the center keeping these issues front and center, if you will, in the future.
Yes, my hope is that this center becomes a place where experts and advocates and lawyers and students are always talking about learning, developing theories, producing knowledge, engaging in programmatic projects and in advocacy that focus on the center's mission, which is civil and human rights that disproportionately affect Muslim, Arab, and South Asian communities in the United States through a cross-racial, interfaith, and transnational approach. So although we focus on what is otherwise a very diverse minority group in the United States, we fully understand and appreciate and acknowledge that you cannot understand the ways in which these communities' civil and human rights are violated without understanding how anti-Black racism works in the United States, how U.S. empire operates in the Middle East and North Africa and South Asia, how Orientalism has infected the ways in which these communities are treated, particularly by the state. And we continue to see it in the counterterrorism context and national security context, where Muslims and Arabs and those who look like them are presumed to be disloyal, presumed to be sympathetic to terrorism, if not terrorists themselves. And that is actually not only acceptable, but it's politically advantageous to many Republicans and candidates on the right whose primary platform is Islamophobia, in addition to xenophobia and anti-immigration policies. So there's a lot of work to be done in that front. And unfortunately, there are not very many institutions in the United States that directly address these issues as compared to the degree and extent of the problem. And though these issues were in the headlines when the Muslim ban came out in January 2017, and we saw this wave of protests, and many of us were very excited to see whites and Blacks and Latinos and people who were not Muslim, Arab, and South Asian showing up at the airports and protesting en masse. But we are now 3 years later, and the ban is still in place. It was extended to some African countries with large Muslim populations, and Islamophobia is still alive and thriving. And so the challenge of the center and those who support the center is, how do we address these issues holistically, comprehensively, not have silos between communities, not play the oppression Olympics, and understand that the root causes are the same, and therefore we have to work together on these various social justice issues that may affect different communities to different degrees, but they really do come from the same legal structures, the same policy structures, and the same racist ideologies.
Well, you certainly have your work cut out for you down the road, but we wish you well. Unfortunately, we're going to have to stop there, but we'll provide the website so that people can find out more about the Center for Security, Race, and Rights. And I thank you very much, Sahar Aziz.
Thank you.